Overkill just released their 20th studio album called Scorched, released on April 14th, 2023, and they chose an interesting day to release it because they are competing with Metallica for the attention. And what's interesting is that Metallica and Overkill both began around the same time, but unlike Metallica, Overkill continued to be a thrash metal band. They haven't really changed much over the years, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But first, let me comment on them having 20 albums. It's really impressive because apart from Frank Zappa or Buckethead with hundreds of albums, you don't have a lot of rock bands hitting that 20 album mark. I think they're just 2 albums shy of what Motorhead has and 9 albums shy of what the Rolling Stones have, so that's pretty impressive to begin with. Overkill released their first album, Field of Fire, back in 1985, and they were fairly popular. Not as popular as the big four of thrash, but many have said if you were to make a second big four, who would you add? I think a lot of people would include Overkill along with Testament, Exodus, and Death Angel, amongst other bands, of course. But they have been very consistent in releasing albums, maybe about only 2 or 3 years between releases. Even in the 90s, when a lot of thrash bands were putting out these alternative rock albums, Overkill continued to put out thrash metal, although they did adapt their style a little bit with the 90s albums to more of a groove metal style. But I think their biggest comeback came in 2010 with Ironbound, and since then they have been releasing solid albums on a consistent basis. And that brings us to Scorched, released in 2023, which is the biggest gap they've had between albums, which is, wait for it, 4 years. So pretty impressive considering that bands like Iron Maiden, Metallica, and Judas Priest average about 6 or 7 years per release. As I was saying, Scorched is their 20th studio album. This was released on Nuclear Blast Records and the follow-up to Wings of War from 2019. But like most bands, the album was well underway in 2020, but then the pandemic hit and that delayed things, as it did with most albums coming out these days. It's interesting that the original release was supposed to be April of 2021. Let's talk about the songs. There are 10 songs, 51 minutes in length. So far everything looks pretty good for a thrash metal album. They opened with the title track, and I thought it was pretty cool. The main intro guitar riff had this neoclassical feel to it, but then they went into the straightforward galloping thrash metal that we were all expecting. The song is typical Overkill. You have Bobby Blitz singing the chorus and other members doing some backing vocals. The song has a nice tempo, some fast and slow parts, and a good start to the album. Going Home is the second track. This is a typical thrasher. It has everything you would expect from the band. I like the bass guitar sound. It has a thick and heavy sound that you hear in the background. It has a nice groove, some lead guitar playing. It's very melodic. Has that classic thrash metal sound. They're still playing the type of music they were playing in the late 80s. Next is The Surgeon. This was the lead single. It was a very heavy thrasher. I think they released this single just to tell everybody, saying, hey, we're still here, we're heavy, we haven't changed that much. It's a great song. The chorus is memorable. It's a little heavier, it's a little darker, it has that great sound. I think the song really delivers in the breakdown, because when you listen to a thrash metal, in order to make it stand out, you kind of need a good breakdown, and I think they slowed it down a little and played some heavy, chunky riffs, so that really worked. Twist of the Wick has a slow intro. It makes you think you're going to get like one of those like slower, doomier songs, but once it takes off, it's actually one of the fastest and heaviest songs. This one has some really great drumming on it. I really like the chorus. I think Bobby's vocals are a little darker when he sings the song, and I had to Google what Twist the Wick means, and the result I got, it means like a race course with many turns. Although the song seems to be more about talking about evil in the world, things like that. But anyway, definitely a good thrash metal song. We're about halfway through the album. We got a song called Wicked Place, the second single, and this one they slow down the pace a little bit. It's still an energetic thrash metal song, but they're focusing more on the groove. I like the outro to the song. Sounds like they're playing like a cello or something like that, so I thought it was a nice touch. As we get into the second half of the album, we have a song called Won't Be Coming Back, and I think this one's a little different. I guess it would be closer to traditional heavy metal, less of that fast and heavy thrashing sounds. They play some interesting guitar riffs on the high end of the guitar neck. I still think it's one of the more melodic songs in the album. Actually, I think it's one of my favorites because it's a little different. It's almost like they took some influence from like the glam metal period of the 80s and they kind of made it like into a thrash or overkill song. Now we get to the closest thing to a ballad we have so far. That's called Fever. This one, it's moody and atmospheric. Bobby Blitz has more of like a smoother singing style. The song picks up, it's a little more reminiscent of their 90s groove. They go back and forth between the atmospheric sections with the clean guitars and the heavier, chunky riffs. It's a nice change of pace for an album. It has a lot of similar sounding songs on the first half of the album. And 3 songs left in the album, we get some more thrash metal, and this song is called Harder They Fall. It's just old school, in-your-face, aggressive, fast-paced thrash metal. It's old school overkill. And you have the memorable palm-muted, distorted thrash metal guitar riffs and the backing vocals. Everything you would expect. The penultimate song is called Know Her Name. It's very good. Not much else to say about it. Not too fast, not too slow. Has some nice guitar riffs. I like the bass guitar interlude at around the 3-minute mark. I thought that worked pretty well in the song, and they also have some heavy galloping guitar riffs. So it's a good song. That's pretty much all I have to say. And the final song is called Bag of Bones. And the word I'm going to use for this song is like bouncy. That's just how I feel. It's like those thick palm muted guitar riffs and the cool bass guitar sound. And it's almost like those danceable kinds of thrash songs, if that makes sense. It's just a feeling I get with the rhythm of the song. So, in conclusion, this is a band that gets better with age, or at least in my opinion, I think they do. I've never done an Overkill ranking video, but I think if I did, it would be one of those rare occasions where like the older albums from the 80s would be kind of towards the bottom and some of the newer stuff from the 2000s would be up at the top. I don't know where this would rank at this point, but I might do an Overkill ranking in the future. Also, I think people complaining about the new Metallica album not being how they were playing back in the 80s really need to forget about Metallica and just listen to Overkill. Because this is the thrash metal album that they wanted with Metallica, but didn't realize it. So I'm going to give this album the same score I gave 72 Seasons. It's going to be an 8 out of 10. It's consistent, just like this band always is. Let me know in the comments what you think. Here's a playlist of 2023 new album reviews. Everything I've reviewed since January in one playlist. If you want to check it out, check out some of the other reviews. That's all. Please remember, like, comment, subscribe. See you in the next one.